The doctor's words were still ringing in Elvis's ears as he stared at the sold-out Madison Square Garden crowd of 20,000 people. One more performance could kill you, Elvis. Your heart can't take it. But walking away wasn't an option. What Elvis did next didn't just shock everyone in that arena. It started a mental health revolution that changed how America talks about the battles we fight in silence. It was June 15th, 1976, and Elvis was supposed to be at the peak of his career. Tonight's MSG show had sold out in 4 hours, but behind the rhinestone jumpsuits and legendary smile, Elvis was fighting a battle no one could see. For 6 months, Elvis had been experiencing the episodes. Chest tightness, racing heart, shaking hands, blurred vision, like drowning on dry land. The first time, during Memphis rehearsal, he'd collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. Tests found nothing physically wrong. Anxiety, Dr. Robert Chen had explained. Panic attacks from stress and pressure. Your body is telling you to slow down. But slowing down wasn't something Elvis knew how to do. His band had noticed the changes. Jerry Sheff saw him grip microphones until his knuckles went white. James Burton watched him shake for 10 minutes after shows. Most worried of all was Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend and rhythm guitarist. Charlie had been with Elvis since their Army days, and he'd never seen his friend struggle like this. The man who could command any stage, who could make 50,000 people sing along to every word, was terrified of something he couldn't fight, couldn't control, and couldn't escape. "Elvis," Charlie had said just 3 days before the MSG show, "maybe you should talk to someone, a professional. This isn't just stress anymore." "I'm fine, Charlie," Elvis had replied, but his voice betrayed him. He wasn't fine, and they both knew it. The morning of the MSG show, Elvis saw Dr. Samuel Morrison, a cardiac specialist. "Your resting heart rate is 120 beats per minute," Dr. Morrison said, studying the EKG. "Normal is 60 to 80. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated. Your body is in constant fight-or-flight response." "What are you telling me, Doc?" Elvis asked. "If you perform tonight, the adrenaline and physical exertion could trigger a cardiac event, a heart attack, Elvis. At your age, with your condition, it could be fatal." The room went silent except for the sound of Elvis's own irregular heartbeat echoing from the cardiac monitor. "So what do I do?" Elvis asked. "Cancel the show? Disappoint 20,000 people who've been waiting months to see me?" "Yes," Dr. Morrison replied without hesitation. "That's exactly what you do. You cancel the show, you take 6 months off, you get proper treatment for the anxiety, and you learn to manage this condition. Or you risk dying on that stage tonight." Elvis looked at Dr. Morrison for a long moment, then at Charlie Hodge, who had driven him to the appointment. "Doc," Elvis said finally, "I've never canceled a show in my entire career, not once. I've performed with broken ribs, with the flu, with a 104-degree fever. How do I look at 20,000 people and tell them I can't perform because I'm scared?" "Because being scared doesn't make you weak," Dr. Morrison replied. "It makes you human." But Elvis wasn't convinced. He'd built his entire identity around being larger than life, stronger than his problems, and always available for his fans. The idea of admitting weakness, of showing vulnerability, felt like career suicide. As they drove from the doctor's office to Madison Square Garden, Charlie tried to convince Elvis to listen to Dr. Morrison's advice. "Elvis, nobody expects you to be superhuman," Charlie said. "Your fans would understand." "Would they?" Elvis asked. "Or would they think I'm just making excuses? Would the headlines read, 'Elvis too weak to perform,' or 'The King loses his crown'?" Elvis walked through backstage like a man heading to his execution. Every crew member greeted him with smiles, unaware their boss might die tonight. In his dressing room, Elvis stared at his pale reflection. Joe Esposito knocked. "Elvis, we need the set list." "Joe," Elvis said, "what if I canceled tonight?" Joe looked stunned. Elvis explained Dr. Morrison's warning. Joe went white. "Then we cancel. I don't care about money or contracts." But Elvis shook his head. "I've been Elvis Presley for 20 years. I don't know how to be anything else." 30 minutes before showtime, Elvis's entire band gathered in his dressing room. Word had spread about Dr. Morrison's warning, and everyone was terrified. These men had played thousands of shows with Elvis, but they'd never faced the possibility that their friend might literally die on stage. James Burton spoke first. "Elvis, we'll support whatever you decide. If you want to cancel, we'll help you face the music. If you want to perform, we'll be right there with you. But, Jerry Chef added, we need you to know that you're more important than any show. We'd rather have you alive and canceled than dead and legendary. Charlie Hodge put his hand on Elvis's shoulder. Elvis, you've spent 20 years taking care of everyone else. Your fans, your family, your crew, your band. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself. Elvis looked around the room at the faces of men who had become his brothers. These weren't just employees. They were friends who had seen him at his best and his worst, who had stood by him through scandals and triumphs, who genuinely cared whether he lived or died. What if I go out there and tell them the truth? Elvis asked quietly. What do you mean? Joe asked. What if I go out there and tell them that I'm scared, that I'm struggling, that sometimes being Elvis Presley is more than I can handle? What if I'm honest about what's really going on? The room fell silent. In 1976, mental health wasn't something people discussed publicly, especially not celebrities. Admitting to anxiety or panic attacks was seen as a sign of weakness, a career killer that could destroy everything Elvis had built. But something about the idea felt right to Elvis. Maybe, he said, there are people in that audience who are fighting the same battles I am. Maybe they need to hear that they're not alone. At 8:30 p.m., Elvis Presley walked onto the Madison Square Garden stage to thunderous applause. 20,000 people rose to their feet, screaming, cheering, and showing the kind of love that had sustained him throughout his career. But instead of launching into his usual opening number, Elvis walked to the microphone and held up his hand for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena, before we begin tonight's show, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told an audience before. The crowd quieted, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. This morning, my doctor told me that performing tonight could kill me. He told me that my heart is under so much stress that taking this stage could be the last thing I ever do. A gasp rippled through the audience. People looked around at each other, unsure whether Elvis was joking or being serious. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Elvis continued, his voice growing stronger. I'm telling you this because I realized something today. For 20 years, I've tried to be perfect for you. I've tried to be the Elvis Presley you wanted me to be. Always strong, always confident, always larger than life. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces staring up at him. But the truth is, sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes the pressure of being who you expect me to be is overwhelming. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm enough, if I'm worthy of your love, if I can keep being the person you think I am. The arena was completely silent now. 20,000 people hanging on every word. My doctor told me that I'm having panic attacks, that my body is rebelling against the stress of trying to be perfect all the time. And you know what? He's right. I am scared. I am struggling. I am human. Elvis gripped the microphone stand, his hands shaking slightly. But I'm here tonight because I realized something else. If I'm going through this, then maybe some of you are too. Maybe there are people in this audience who also lie awake at night feeling overwhelmed. Maybe there are people here who also feel like they have to be perfect all the time, who are afraid to admit that they're struggling. He looked directly into the crowd, making eye contact with individuals scattered throughout the arena. So tonight, I want to dedicate this show to everyone who's fighting battles that nobody else can see. To everyone who's scared but shows up anyway. To everyone who feels like they have to be perfect but knows they're just trying to make it through another day. The applause started slowly, then built into something Elvis had never heard before. It wasn't the screaming adoration of fans worship their idol. It was something deeper. The sound of people recognizing their own struggles in his words, the sound of connection and understanding. Elvis performed for 2 hours that night, giving everything he had to an audience that gave everything back. He sang with a vulnerability he'd never shown before, speaking between songs about the pressure of fame, the loneliness of success, and the importance of mental health. When he performed Can't Help Falling in Love, he dedicated it to everyone learning to love themselves, struggles and all. During Love Me Tender, he stopped mid-song to say, "It's okay to be gentle with yourself. It's okay to admit you need help. It's okay to not be okay." The crowd sang along not just to the lyrics, but to the message. 20,000 people participated in what became an impromptu group therapy session disguised as a concert. When the show ended, Elvis didn't collapse backstage as everyone had feared. Instead, he felt lighter than he had in months. The honesty had been terrifying, but it had also been liberating. The response was immediate and unprecedented. Within hours of the concert, phone lines at mental health organizations across the country were flooded with calls from people seeking help. The phrase, "It's okay to not be okay," became a rallying cry for mental health awareness decades before it became mainstream. Radio DJs read Elvis's words on the air. Newspapers printed full transcripts of his mid-show speech. Television talk shows dedicated entire episodes to discussing what Elvis had done at Madison Square Garden. But more importantly, other celebrities began following his lead. Johnny Cash admitted publicly to his struggles with depression. Diana Ross spoke openly about anxiety. Elton John discussed the pressures of fame and the importance of seeking professional help. Dr. Morrison, who had been watching the broadcast from his office, later said, "Elvis did something that night that was medically impossible. He turned a potentially fatal situation into a healing experience, not just for himself, but for thousands of other people." The Elvis Presley Foundation for Mental Health was established 3 months later. Funded initially by Elvis himself and later by donations from fans, the foundation provided free counseling services, educational programs, and advocacy for mental health awareness. It became one of the first celebrity-founded organizations dedicated specifically to breaking the stigma around mental illness. Elvis continued performing, but with important changes. He limited his schedule, worked with therapists to manage his anxiety, and incorporated mental health messaging into his concerts. He became an advocate for the idea that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. The Madison Square Garden concert became known as The Honesty Show, and bootleg recordings circulated widely among fans and mental health professionals alike. It was studied in psychology courses, referenced in therapy sessions, and became a turning point in how America talked about mental health. Charlie Hodge, reflecting on that night years later, said, "Elvis could have died on that stage, and he knew it. But instead of running away from the fear, he faced it head-on and turned it into something beautiful. He showed 20,000 people that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage." Joe Esposito added, "That night, Elvis stopped being just a performer and became a healer. He saved his own life by admitting he was human, and in the process, he saved a lot of other lives too." Today, the mental health advocacy that began that night continues to impact millions of people. The foundation Elvis started has provided services to over 2 million individuals, and the Honesty Show model has been adopted by therapists, support groups, and mental health organizations worldwide. At Graceland, visitors can see the original microphone Elvis used that night at Madison Square Garden, along with hundreds of letters from people whose lives were changed by his willingness to be vulnerable. A plaque beside the exhibit reads, "Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit you're scared." The story of Elvis's decision to perform despite his doctor's warning reminds us that true strength isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and choosing to face it honestly. Elvis could have canceled that show and protected his image as the invincible king of rock and roll. Instead, he chose to be real, to be human, and to show that even our heroes struggle with the same fears and doubts that we all face. In doing so, he didn't just save his own life, he started a conversation that continues to save lives today. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is look at a room full of people and say, "I'm scared too." And that's okay. The man who walked onto the Madison Square Garden stage that night was terrified he might die. The man who walked off had discovered that admitting your fears might be the most life-giving thing you can do.